So this week we're looking at show business, performance in Hartford, and really to really get to grips with that, we need to go back to the 18th century. At the time, satirical plays were the thing. They were very, very popular, and the butt of the jokes in these plays tended to be the people in authority and the establishment, and none more so than poor George II and his Prime Minister, Sir Robert Walpole. And they were both particularly targeted by some very cruel jokes. Both men were neither tall nor slim. And also poor George II, he was a figure of fun because he was rumoured to suffer from hemorrhoids and an anal fistula. So the playwrights had a huge amount of fun with this information. But it all came to a point with the writing of a new play called The Golden Rump. And here we can see a satirical cartoon about it. And really, at this point, the joke had gone too far and it just wasn't on the way poor George II and Walpole were being pilloried like this. So Walpole took measures to stop it happening. And in fact, he brought about the Theatrical Licensing Act of 1737. And this act meant that any new plays that were written had to be submitted for approval to the Lord Chamberlain before they could be performed. So this spoilt the fun of all the cruel satirists and protected the establishment from some of these very, very unkind jokes. And here you can see the Licensing Act being made a joke of itself in this cartoon. So what this meant for the theatre was that any new play had to be submitted for approval, so your choice of topic was going to be severely limited and a lot of good jokes were going to have to be unused. But it did lead to a resurgence in older plays, and this was very good for travelling theatre troupes, of which there were many moving around the country. It meant they only had to learn a few plays, a handful of plays, and they could move around from town to town performing these to people far away from London for whom it would seem quite new material. So that was a good thing. So let's think a little bit about what the theatre experience in the 18th century was like. And here's our old friend Thomas Rowlandson capturing a scene of the audience at the Drury Lane Theatre in London. And what you'll notice immediately is that nobody is really paying attention to the performance itself. There's gossiping, flirting, there's waving. People would have been calling across and waving across to people they knew on the other side of the theatre. It would have been incredibly difficult for any of the performers to have made themselves heard. But it really wasn't about the performance. You didn't go to the theatre to see a play in particular. You went to see and be seen. So it was a very, very different environment to what we are used to with going to the theatre today, where we're always hearing in the press about actors stopping their performance to tell people off for using their mobile phones or interrupting. A very, very different experience indeed. Very, very different experience in the 18th century, and also here in Hartford at that time. Within those performances, you would get recurring characters, much like pantomime. This tradition has survived in pantomime as we still know it today, and they would have catchphrases. This character is Paul Pry, and he would turn up in various comedies, hiding behind doorposts and leaning in the shadows and overhearing things that weren't meant for his ears. And at that point, he would then leap out and say, "I hope I don't intrude." And the audience would get very excited when they saw him and join in with his catchphrase. And as I say, this tradition has carried on in modern pantomime, but these were very, very popular characters that would turn up. But here in Hartford, we didn't have big theatres like Drury Lane. Performances took place in rooms above or behind pubs. And you can see here some examples. We have a large collection of playbills here at the museum. And here are some from the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And the venues of the time, really the prominent venues were the Bull Inn on Bull Plain and the Cold Bath Inn on North Road, where North Road meets St Andrew Street. The site's now covered by a block of flats. And also the Back Street Theatre, which was behind the Angel Pub on Railway Street, as we now know it. But you can see from these playbills that it was a very, very mixed bunch. You didn't just go along to see one play. It was a whole evening of entertainment. And you might have a farce followed by a tragedy, followed by an acrobat. Like here in this central one, you can see Jocko the Brazilian ape, played by Signor Garci, the celebrated man monkey. And I'm sure that must have been a great spectacle. But you might have a psychic, a telepath, a performance of musical glasses. It really was a mixed bag. It was a whole evening's entertainment, a real variety performance. Again, very different to what we expect when we go to the theatre today. But the problem with a lot of these performances was that they were associated with pubs, and not everybody felt comfortable going to these venues, particularly ladies in the middle classes, perhaps might not have felt that this was the best place for them to go and enjoy those performances. And things really changed in Hertford, particularly with the construction of the Shire Hall and its assembly room space above in 1769, and then in 1857 the Corn Exchange, because for the first time Hertford had some respectable venues, so more people began to enjoy theatre performances. They felt it was a decent place for them to go as a family, as a middle class couple, and it really took off from there. And soon, going to watch a performance wasn't enough. People wanted to be in a performance. And this is really the time of the birth of amateur dramatics, late 19th, early 20th century. This is when Amdram really starts to take off. And soon everybody is getting involved. There's a scene here from a play being performed at the Assembly Rooms at the Shire Hall. But on the left, you can see a flyer. Even the Marchioness Townsend at Balls Park has created a little theatre in her home, the Bijou Theatre, and all of her glamorous aristocratic friends are taking parts in the performance. And it became an activity for the middle classes and upper stratums of society, a respectable activity, taking part in a play. And soon everybody was getting into it. You can see the cast of The Sorcerer at the Corn Exchange in 1905. They're a real mixed bunch of people. It's not just for people in the back of pubs anymore. It's the cast of The Mikado a year later. I like this pair. If you look, they're seated near the front on the right, the blonde lady and her well-built friend. They look like the naughty members of the cast and like they're having a lot of fun taking part. But it's not just adults. Now it's so respectable, even children can take part. And this is the League of Pity. They're performing Cinderella here at Bryn Alt, a house in Bengio. The League of Pity was an organisation set up by the NSPCC. It was for children to learn about the charity and also to help fundraise for its work. And this is the Hartford branch putting on this fundraising performance. Bryn Alt is no longer called Bryn Alt, it's now Whitaker. Around the 1920s, a lady who took the house on had a deep dislike of the Welsh and refused to live in a house with a Welsh name, so she changed it to Whitaker, and the name still stays today. And here's a lovely photograph of St Andrew's School, formerly of Hartingbury Road, now up at Seal. And you can see the quality of the costumes that they're all wearing. Everybody's really put a lot of effort into this performance of Rumpelstiltskin. And if you look closely in the front row, there's a small person crammed into an excellent duck costume and made to sit at a very uncomfortable angle so that the photographer can capture those splendid feathers there. So amateur dramatics is really taking off, and we have in Hertford the Corps de Dramatique, but they're not really a sort of formal organisation. It's a bit hit and miss. And in 1919, a meeting was held at the Corn Exchange where it was proposed that Hertford needed a formal dramatic group, and people were very enthusiastic about this idea. And that evening at the meeting, over 100 people signed up straight away. And you had to pay a subs of 5 shillings for ordinary members. Honorary members had to pay a guinea, but presumably they could afford to, and they could lend their names to the organisation and help it in that way. But the first play they produced, you can see top left, it's called Mice and Men, not Of Mice and Men. This one is a romantic comedy. On the right is a 1963 production of Babes in the Wood. So these performances are 40 years apart, and really the quality and stagecraft has increased, and HDOS has become quite a great organisation. But they didn't just stop with plays. Their first musical was Pirates of Penzance in 1920. This was a notable performance in that during the play, tarpaulin on the roof of the Corn Exchange started fluttering about and distracting from the performance. So members of the cast climbed up to the roof to try and sort it out. But while they were doing that, they dislodged a big pane of glass which fell and shattered on the audience below. Fortunately, the conductor of the orchestra was Dr. Eager, a medical doctor, so he was able to administer first aid to the members of the audience. Everybody got patched up and they continued the performance, and everybody had a wonderful evening after all. Now, the picture in the bottom of the screen you can see is a performance of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by Young Idea. And this is a group that was set up by the Hartford Dramatic and Operatic Society in 1971, originally for children of cast members, but it soon spread out to other young people in the town. Young people could join, they could do workshops in stagecraft, makeup, technical work, performance, and really learn some skills. And many members of Young Idea have gone on to work in the performing arts professionally. And in this photograph, there is a very, very young George Ezra, Hartford's most famous pop star. So HDOS really consolidated the love of amateur dramatics and performance within the town from their conception in 1919. These are some pictures from the Hartford Museum collection, some of our images of HDOS members in these amazing costumes. There was a little bit of unrest about the direction HDOS was taking, and in June 1961 a letter of resignation was sent to the president of HDOS on behalf of the entire dramatic subcommittee, and this was over the decision not to perform George Bernard Shaw's St. Joan. And this decision was based on the fact that the last two plays that they'd put on had been a financial loss, and they found that the musicals were really bringing the funds in that the organisation needed to continue. So it wasn't a personal response, it was just that they needed to ensure that the club could continue financially, and dramatic plays just weren't bringing in the crowds. So the dramatic subcommittee parted ways with HDOS and formed the Company of Players in 1962, starting with just 12 members, and they put on plays at St Nicholas Hall just behind the Verger's house on St Andrew Street, but it wasn't ideal, it wasn't their space, so they were limited to one-act plays, and as the group grew this became less easy to manage. But when Christchurch School closed on Port Vale, the group were able to take over the school hall, and they fitted it out as a theatre, and it's what we now know as the Little Theatre today. And the first play they produced there was Tilly of Bloomsbury, which you can see in this large image here. So everybody is either watching performances or taking part in performances. Some of those performances, the funds raised are to keep those organisations going, but people also use performance to raise money for charity. And here's a few examples. On the far right is a performance at the Shire Hall for the Indian Relief Fund. This was to raise money to support the victims of the Indian Mutiny. In the centre, at the Corn Exchange, we've got two entertainments in aid of the distress in Lancashire. This was the Lancashire cotton famine in 1863, and the funds raised here were to support impoverished cotton workers who'd been laid off by the mills and were struggling to survive. And you can also see part of a bill here for raising money for the All Saints Church Organ Fund. We talked last week about the Great Fire that destroyed All Saints in 1891. And not only did they have to raise money to build a new church, they needed everything to kit it out, including an organ, and this event was for that. These lovely young ladies on the left are the Merrymakers. During the Second World War, HDOS had a bit of a problem in that 45 of their members were serving in the armed forces. So they suspended their general programme and formed a smaller group, the Merrymakers. And over the 5 years of the war, the troupe performed over 200 times to around 30,000 people, and they raised over £1,300 for the war effort. And in today's money, that's about £60,000. So a wonderful initiative from them. So theatre, as we have seen, is becoming incredibly popular in Hartford. To the point where in 1962, spearheaded by Hertfordshire Mercury theatre critic Cyril Heath, Hartford Theatre Week comes into being. The idea was that local theatre groups would compete to win the Mercury Challenge Cup, and it was funded originally by the Hertfordshire Mercury, and it was only supposed to last 10 years, but it's still going today. It was so popular. But things really took off in about 1986 when the festival was added to the Drama Festival Association's British All Winners Festival. I've had to look that up. It's a long title. But what this effectively meant was that the troupe that won Hartford Theatre Week could compete at a national level. And so from this point, theatre groups from around the country started to come to Hartford to take part in Theatre Week and compete in the competition. And the picture you can see on the left is a page from the programme from the first ever Hartford Theatre Week. And it's telling us about the performance we can expect from Ware Dramatic Society. Now, Castle Hall really came into being due to a change in local government. In the early 70s, local authorities were completely restructured, and Hertford Borough Council was being wound down, and in its place was going to be Hertford Town Council and East Herts District Council. And this is all well and good, but the Borough Council were very worried about some money that they were sitting on. They'd recently sold some land at Hertford Sewage Works, which had raised a nice sum of money. And they were worried that when it was all handed over to East Herts District Council, that money might be spent elsewhere in East Hertfordshire and not in Hertford. So they wanted to do something in the town before their reign was over. And there was a real need for a community space. The site of the former castle cinema next to the castle was derelict, and this seemed like a good spot to build a community centre and performance space. So that's what happened. The design of the building was inspired by Hertford's brewing history, and it was supposed to echo the maltings around the town, of which in the 1970s there were still quite a few, not so many left today. But you can see here it being built in 1975, cost nearly £1 million in the end, and it was opened in 77 by Princess Margaret. But there was some controversy. You can see bottom right, the bar inside Castle Hall. This was a target for the town's local publicans, who were very, very worried and were complaining that it was going to take business away from the town's pubs. But that turned out not to be the case, happily, so that worked out well. The picture top right, it had fully fitted kitchens, so not only could it stage performances, it could host banquets and dinner dances, and people would hire the space for an event like that and bring in outside caterers who would use these top-of-the-range facilities to deliver all the food for the event. So it really was a multi-purpose site, and anybody could hire it, and it hosted all kinds of events, from wrestling matches to theatre productions, and HDOS moved their productions and pantomimes over to Castle Hall once it had been built. But by around 2009, things weren't going quite so well. Castle Hall was only operating at about 70% capacity, and of that, only 10% was arts and entertainment offering. So it was a lot of people hiring it for meetings and things like that. And the council really wanted to change that. They wanted to boost the arts offering in Hertford and add some extra facilities. So Castle Hall closed its doors in May 2010 and went into a little cocoon and to a chrysalis and emerged as a wonderful butterfly the following November, Hertford Theatre. And this was a completely different kettle of fish. It not only had a professional 480-seat auditorium with full audio-visual equipment, it had gallery space, it had a professional team of 15 staff, and it also had dance studios. And you can see this nice quote from Rhys Thomas, the theatre director, that the biggest change was, rather than just being a space people could hire to put on performances or have a meeting, they had a dedicated programme aimed at a wide range of Hertford residents, something for everybody, and there was a real strategy behind it. And we've all enjoyed the theatre for the last 10 years very much, I'm sure, and there's exciting things to come. East Herts District Council have invested over £13 million in works to the theatre, so that there'll be a dedicated cinema space. And what I'm quite excited about is opening up the castle motte and the entrance into the castle from the theatre, which I think will be a really attractive addition to the town. But we're all sitting and waiting for that to happen. Obviously, things are not able to proceed as they might have done with the current pandemic. Yes, Castle Hall, now the beautiful butterfly Hertford Theatre. I can't stop talking about live performance without mentioning the grand pageant of 1914. This was the brainchild of Hertford Museum founder William Frampton Andrews. He was mayor at the time, and he wanted to do something to celebrate Hertford's millenary. It was said to be 1,000 years since Hertford had been founded by Edward II, and we really ought to mark it in an important and grand way. So he held a meeting, and a lot of people had noted that St Albans had had a very successful pageant in 1907, and it attracted over 23,000 people to Verulamium Park over 6 days. So we thought, yes, that's a good idea, let's do that. And who should we get to help us with it? Let's get St Albans pageant master, Mr Charles Ashdown. So he was recruited, a lot of fundraising went on, and about 500 men, women and children of Hertford, plus 150 Haileybury students, were co-opted into performing in this grand pageant. Now, the pageant itself, it was set to be performed at Hertford Castle in the grounds there, and it was a performance in 8 episodes, each marking a key moment in Hertford's history. And Hertford Castle was dubbed Pageant House. Local women were installed in the upper rooms, knitting chainmail and creating fabulous costumes. Main roles were offered to the most important people in the town, obviously. Here you can see top right with the moustache. That's Councillor Frank Page. He was Hertford's youngest ever mayor. His record's not been beaten yet. He was very sadly killed at the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917, but he plays King David Bruce of Scotland, and next to him is prominence list of Philip Longmore playing King John of France. So all the main parts were assigned to prominent citizens. All the bishops and clergy in the play were played by actual clergy, Hertford, members of Hertford clergy from all denominations. And the performance itself was going to take place over 6 days from the 29th of June. Now you can see in this bottom picture, a 1,000-seater grandstand was constructed on the lawn at Hertford Castle, and tickets ranged in price from 21 shillings to 3 shillings, but it was still thought that this might be above the means of some people in the town. So 2 dress rehearsals were organised for people at very, very low cost, for those that wouldn't have been able to afford the other performances. And one of these was a children's performance, and 1,700 school children were brought in to watch it. Now, this would have been very, very exciting. Here you can see some of the knights. The Haileybury students were firing trebuchet catapults. There were hails of arrows, horses rearing up, lots of singing and dancing. It would have been a very, very grand affair. But for those children, bear in mind, it was a 3-hour performance in very, very archaic language. So I think we can sympathise with some of them who might have felt they were nodding off a bit or losing concentration. And in fact, the Mercury commented that their babble marred the effect of some of the episodes, but I think we can be sympathetic to them. But rave reviews were posted for the pageant. It was a huge success. And the last show on the 4th of July, at the end of it, all the performers paraded through the town. And you can imagine, if you hadn't been able to see it, what a sight it must have been just to be in the town and see this bunch of people parading through in these fabulous, fabulous costumes. So we'll move on from live performance and let's go to the big screen. The first cinema in Hertford was the People's Electric Theatre, and it was here on the corner of Bull Plain and Maidenhead Street. The building still stands, although that 3rd storey has been sliced off. And this was run by a Mr. Shepherd, who opened it in 1910, and it seated 160 people. But in 1914, he closed it up because he'd bought a rival cinema, the Premier Theatre, on Market Street, which you can see here on the left. Now, this was a much bigger cinema. It had 220 seats and also an orchestra pit, and he could show live entertainment as well. And it changed name a few times. It became the Popular Picture Playhouse, and by the time it closed in 1943, it was known as the Regent. This is Castle Cinema on the site currently occupied by Hertford Theatre. When it was built in 1914, it was Hertford's largest cinema, seating 1,000 people, although that was absolutely halved to 500 in the 1930s when it was modernised to accommodate talking pictures and for the sound equipment to go in. But it was destroyed towards the end of the Second World War, almost completely destroyed by a bombing. But it did reopen in 46, and it carried on until it finally closed its doors for the last time in 1959. Now, this picture always makes me a little bit sad. It's the County Cinema. It opened in 1933 on the corner of London Road and Ware Road, and it was designed as a luxury cinema. It seated 1,000 people. It had a cafe, a car park. It had a beautiful Art Deco interior with an ornamental fish pond and fountain. And it's a great tragedy to me that so far we have yet to come across anybody who has a photograph of the interior of the County Cinema. So if you or anybody you know does, please do let us know, because we don't know of any in existence, which is a real shame. But it could also host live performances, as you can see here from these programmes for HDOS Productions at the County Cinema. The first film shown there was Marlene Dietrich's Blonde Venus, but ultimately the cinema started to fall into disrepair in the late 70s. A local film student got up a petition to try and save the building, but sadly was unsuccessful, and it finally closed in 1982 and was demolished 20 years later in 2002. And I think many of you like me will agree that we really did lose a very, very special building when that happened. But Hertford has not just shown movies, Hertford has also been the source for movies and the location. And Hertfordshire generally is a good place for location scouts to check out. We're very close to London, but we've also got wonderful buildings. Nebworth House, as many of you will know, has been Batman's home. Wayne Manor. Hatfield House is constant source for filming. But here in Hertford, it's actually our railway stations that have attracted film crews. This movie, When Nights Were Bold, it's from 1936, and it was a vehicle for one of Britain's biggest musical stars, Jack Buchanan, and his co-star was the lovely Fay Wray, fresh from her success in King Kong. And the story of the film was about Sir Guy de Vere, who inherits his estate from his father, and he unfortunately falls over while doing a dance number and hits his head, and it sends him back to the 1400s and the golden age of chivalry, and hilarity ensues. It was directed by Jack Raymond. You can see in the picture on the left, Jack Buchanan standing behind Jack Raymond's director's chair. But Hartingfordbury stood in for the fictional village of Little Twittering. And you can see Hartingfordbury Station here in this still. But if we're very lucky and I can make this work, we can see a little clip of the film. So there's Hartingfordbury Station, the train coming in. Managed to get another pig in Lockdown Lunchtime. I'm quite pleased with that. So we'll just move on a little bit and watch them come out of the station. Here we are into Hartingfordbury, and I imagine that a lot of Hartingfordbury locals were probably co-opted to be extras in this scene. So the excitement is genuine, I think, on a lot of the faces that we can see in the background. So we'll move on. Another station, Hertford East, stole the show in 1960 in the film School for Scoundrels. And this starred Ian Carmichael as a sort of hapless, unlucky in love fellow who is an easy target for con men. And he enrolls in Alistair Sim's School of Lifemanship in the town of Yeovil, for which Hertford stands in. And his goal is to defeat his rival, professional cad Terry Thomas, who basically just does what Terry Thomas does in every film, and we all enjoy it very much indeed. So I'll just show you a little clip from that. So here is Hertford East Station. Lovely singer steam train arriving at Hertford East. So it's 1960, so of course everyone's got a cigarette at the station. Ian Carmichael's coming out, but he's not going to go through the main door of the station. He's cutting across to the other exit. That gives us a good opportunity to see all around the building. And off he goes. But it's not just on the big screen. Hertford has featured in lots of television programmes too, so we'll move on. Here you can see top right, Ugly's Beauty Salon on Market Street. This featured in a programme, Jade's Salon, in 2005, when reality television star Jade Goody opened a beauty salon here in Hartford, and the programme charted her progress from enrolling in business school to opening the salon, in which she'd invested £70,000 of her own money. Now, publicity around the show did attract lots and lots of people to Hartford. Certainly the bars on 4th Street did quite a good trade on the back of it. But sadly for Jade, the salon, while the TV show was very successful, the salon itself was not to flourish, and it closed a year later. Below that, you can see a still from the television drama series Foyle's War, which was set in the Second World War, and you can see the familiar Macmullen Brewery buildings here. Now, this was filmed at the time just before this, just ahead of the Sainsbury's redevelopment, so it was a good time to film there. There wasn't a lot going on the site. On the left-hand side of the screen, and you can see not so long ago, just a couple of years, the filming of the BBC series A Very English Scandal, and set decorators had to go around transforming the shops in Marketplace and 4th Street into scenes from the 1970s, which you can see there. But probably Hertford's greatest television moment took place in 1990. Here at Hartford Museum, an outstanding cameo performance from the Hartford Museum Till, you can see centre, when Hartford Museum was transformed into an antique shop for the TV series Lovejoy, everybody's favourite blouson leather jacketed wearing antiques dealer, and you can see some familiar items in these photographs from the filming. There are wooden pilasters, and there is Ian McShane himself sitting outside the museum on the right hand side. So I've got a little clip just to finish up, just so that you can enjoy that. Here we go. Here's Lady Jane bringing Lovejoy to Hartford Museum.
I should think so too.
Is everything all right?
Of course.
You sure?
Look, I'm fine, Lovejoy. Can I just get on my way?
In he comes. Can you see our sedan chair in the corner of the screen there?
Hello, Nick.
Hello, Lovejoy. I was hoping we might be seeing you.
Why, I don't owe you any money, do I?
There are the
I
wooden
heard about the statue.
pilasters.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's...
So, yes, an Oscar-worthy
yeah,
performance
the
there
Oscars.
from
It's
Hartford
more like-
Museum, I'm sure. But thank you so much for joining me for this Lockdown Lunchtime, and especially to those of you who've been here every week. It has been very, very special to me to have you all join me. Thank you so much for getting involved. If you've enjoyed this series of talks and you would like to make a donation, please do go to our website, hertfordmuseum.org, scroll down to the donate button. If you'd like to see some more of our images, please go to hertfordmuseumimages.org, and any questions, please do get in touch, email me. There's my email address. Thank you so, so much. It's been a wonderful 6 weeks, and hopefully I will see you again in the not too distant future. But for the time being, I'm going to hang up my lunch lady tabard and have a little break. But thank you once again. Take care. Bye bye.